Well, inflation is coming down across the U.S. with the annual rate sitting just above 3%. That is still above the Fed's 2% inflation target. But one city has managed to get ahead of the central bank. Rates in Minneapolis fell below 2% in May. Now they are down to 1%. The decline largely attributed to the region's push to increase affordable housing. For more on this, we turn to Peter Frosch, CEO of the Minneapolis St. Paul Regional Economic Development Partnership. Peter, it's good to talk to you. I want to preface this by saying we're talking about affordable housing because shelter, which includes housing costs, is the single biggest contributor to inflation that we're seeing right now. But your plan in Minneapolis, and I mean your as in the city's plan, began before the pandemic. Walk me through how the city approached this issue differently from others, why you think that has brought down inflation to where it is today.
Right. Well, we appreciate the attention on the issue. We're excited about these numbers. It has a lot to do with anticipation. I think what we've seen across the country is that if you're waiting to work on house price inflation, once that trend is really running and multiple years into it, it's very hard to get a hold of. So back in 2015, 16, 17, regional leaders across Minneapolis, St. Paul got together. We have a shared practice of tracking key economic indicators, and we saw that housing prices and rental prices were starting to go up and at a rate that we hadn't seen before. And that sparked kind of a real focus among leaders across the region, even those who weren't focused on housing, to say, what's behind this and what do we need to do to get ahead of it?
So, Peter, when you talk about the fact that you have made progress, the fact that it's under that 2% level that the Fed's struggling to get to on a national level, but how do you keep this trend going? When you talk about keeping Minneapolis more affordable when you compare it to cities of similar size, how do you maintain that advantage?
Well, I think the way that we got here is by having an all-in approach. There's no single solution. There's no single responsible party when it comes to managing housing costs. And it has certainly to do with income, but it's also production. And so together, the region created a set of production goals of 18,000 units a year, which over the past 3 years, the region has exceeded. So that focus on production is key. And one of the reasons I think we've collectively been successful in this geography around production is because you have a lot of creativity and innovation happening regarding housing. So one of the areas around transit corridors, we've had 20 years of major investments in transit infrastructure, and that has unlocked a significant amount of private investment into housing and multifamily housing at affordable and market rate along those transit corridors. Added to that, you had a focus in Minneapolis and St. Paul going back to 2010 and 2012 around converting downtowns into neighborhoods. And so I think there was some data that came out in the last few days showing that Minneapolis has seen some of the highest rates of conversion of office into apartments of any of the downtowns in the country. And then we're reinventing spaces. So suburban malls, golf courses, major industrial zones have all been in the process of being converted into multi-use spaces that include significant amounts of housing. And that's been going on for a number of years.
So some creativity in your approach, but how do you get all the players, the stakeholders on board? Because some of those ideas you just pointed to, we have seen them proposed in other cities, but it's mired in red tape. There's often a lot of pushback from the local community about expanding affordability, affordable housing. I mean, how do you get those competing, or how did you manage to get some of those competing interests on board?
I think part of it has to do with the nature of the geography of this region. For those who aren't as familiar with Minneapolis, St. Paul, the city of Minneapolis is only 11% of the total population, which is roughly 3.7 million. And so you have dozens of cities, all of whom are under pressure to generate solutions. And so it kind of creates this ecosystem of innovation around housing. And I think that's really at the root of what we've seen, that you have a lot of responsible parties who have different options depending on the part of geography they have. The city of Minneapolis has done some really important things, not only in terms of investing in its budget, but several years ago, prior to the pandemic, it was I believe, one of the first, if not the first, major U.S. city to eliminate single-family zoning, which takes a number of years to work through the system, but it's a very powerful signal about kind of signaling, a new sense of innovation and new aggressiveness in terms of how we as a place need to address the issue of housing.
To what extent do you think this can be replicated on a national level? I mean, we talk so much about inflation and rising costs, and yet it feels like your model really points to the importance of local and state efforts.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a shared responsibility model that's got a strong bias towards action and experimentation. So not everything that has been going on here has worked around housing, but I think there's a lot of visibility and real-time sharing about that. And the nature of that experimentation has enabled some de-risking. So, one suburban community will try something, others are seeing it when it works, it speeds adoption in other locations. I mean, other places have suburban malls, they have former industrial zones, they have downtowns and transit corridors. So none of that is necessarily different. I think it maybe has to do with the focus. And then also having goals and tracking those goals is always useful. And I think that might be one of the distinguishing characteristics in our region.
Yeah, setting those markers so you can track progress, certainly a very important thing. Peter Frosch with Minneapolis St. Paul Regional Economic Development Partnership. Appreciate your time today.